Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to Demand Decoded. I'm Dan Stilgo, Marketing Manager at Blend, and back in the studio as usual today with Phil, co-founder at Blend. And it's an interesting topic on the agenda today, kind of framing this as MQL is not the problem. Because I'm sure, Phil, you've seen as well on LinkedIn and other places, like MQL over the past year, couple of years, like has taken some serious heat, serious bashing. Like people are, angry with MQLs being used in marketing now. Like they should just be absolutely, destroyed from this planet Earth and never spoken about again. But I think hopefully what we can bring today is a bit of a different perspective on that and really shed some light on if that's really the case, if MQL, if it's a null and void label or the truth behind it, I suppose.
It's an interesting one, Dan. Thanks. Yeah. Hi, everybody. It has come in for a right bashing lately.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of truth in the discourse that's taking place, but it's misguided, misplaced in some instances at this thing, MQL. And, what we'll explore today is the fact that in truth MQL is nothing more than a label, right? And as a label, it's not the source of our problems. It's just a term that we apply to a subset of our data that we've generated through our marketing efforts. But it's become synonymous with something, and that something is the thing that's got people irritated and wound up. But as marketers, we're free to remember that MQL is just a label, just a label that we choose where we apply it, what it applies to, and we're free to do that if we want to, and if we think that it, as a label within our system, still has a place and still has value. There's no need to necessarily destroy it altogether simply because of how the things that it's synonymous with no longer carry the value that they used to. And before we dive in, I wanted to express my feeling that the real issue with MQLs is born out of the fact that they became synonymous with something, which is a tendency of marketing communities these days to take a thing, sort of agree a generalized consensus of its definition, and then it becomes inseparable from that definition. It's given this identity and personality that's far more than it really is. And in this case, MQL became synonymous really with a gamified approach to marketing measurement. Qualified leads sound good to leadership. They became a KPI. Lead scoring became a very, very typical way to identify qualified leads, but it also became a very good way to inflate those numbers through really a cheating of our own results and our own success in some cases. And that set of sort of changes that took place is what's brought us to where we are today, which is everything that MQL tends to represent is derided and disliked, but that isn't MQL necessarily.
Yeah. One thing you just said there, which I'd maybe question, is that MQL is almost being cheated slightly, in a way to gamify the results, which does happen. Don't get me wrong. I've literally been in the position where you're looking at lead scoring and you're saying, well, if we just tweak that and give that an extra score of 10, or we add in a new parameter here to say this, 5 page views on this or this email click, give a bit more score because, it could do with a few more MQLs. Not that it always works like that. And my point being that I think the origin of lead scoring, lead nurturing came from a good place, not to try and amplify marketing's value in the business and gamify it and cheat people into thinking it's having an impact when it's not. I don't think that was the case. I just think there was education around what should be done, the right way to do marketing, which was to capture a lead, score them, email them and nurture them, and do those two things synchronously in order to spill out this qualified lead, which is then taken by sales to do further qualification with or follow up with.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think all marketing innovation comes from a good place. We just have a tendency to be so focused on optimizing everything that we can sometimes do a disservice to ourselves in our approach. The saying is that marketers ruin everything, and I think there's some truth in that, because whenever we find a channel, a method, or an approach that has promise, we optimize that thing, we master it, we study it, and in some cases that then starts to erode its own value to us. Lead scoring, of course, there's a lot of sense when you think about, when you explain lead scoring to somebody, it carries a lot of logical value. You can sort of say, well, surely if people do these things, they must mean these things by those actions. They must want this thing we're offering and we're selling. Of course, the challenge in marketing is always to separate sort of causality from correlation, and so often the things that you can measure are different to the things that actually indicate what we're looking for from buyers. And it wasn't anybody's conscious decision to do this, but we've ended up in a situation where more often than not MQLs are being identified as a result of lead scored behaviors being passed to sales in bulk along with anybody who has actual high intent. That's now sales' problem to produce a conversion rate from that set of MQLs we're presenting them with. Meanwhile, we're tasked with generating more MQLs. Now, we can do that two ways. We can put more contacts and leads in at the top of the funnel, something that actually marketers are pretty good at doing, and we can get more of them to the magical MQL barrier, which tends to produce, over time, first-pass lead scoring systems are always really, really constrained. They're really focused. Marketers always begin in a good place with this technology and really try to identify the things that genuinely, sadly not actually, but they think that will genuinely indicate intent or desire to purchase, and then that will loosen up and broaden up over time until MQL targets are being met, and conversion rate from those MQLs, which is over on sales' side of the sort of process, is not where it should or could be. There's another issue. When you start to look at what's inside your MQL bucket, you start to see the clear solution to this problem. But before we get there, we should finish the exploration of the fact that, MQL is just a label, and marketers are free to use it how and where they like. Businesses are free to use it how and where they like. Question is, should they continue using it given the conversation that's taking place, or is it no longer, does it no longer have a place in marketing systems and platforms?
Again, it is just a label. It depends how you define things. We were joking before this that it could be called, MJ, EL, GL, L, whatever it might be. As long as you have the right definition of it, it doesn't matter. I think your point is more leaning towards now the M in MQL. Should we have marketing qualified leads and sales qualified leads and opportunities and so on, or is it just a case of saying this person is a qualified lead? We are a commercial function working towards one objective. Do we really need to have a distinction between marketing qualified and sales qualified?
Yeah, that's definitely a conundrum. But before we explore that, I want to say that I'm broadly pro using MQL within your marketing measurement and within your system. Part of the reason for that is because it's widely understood if we just correct its application. It's common nomenclature with which people are familiar, so it will help to build some sort of understanding and trust and get a good response within your business. It's also readily available to a lot of us in the tools that we use daily.
HubSpot
it's right there. It's just really, really important that whatever you apply MQL to is both inarguable. You can't have discussion or debate later on about whether this contact or this company is or isn't a thing, such as MQL, because that undermines the whole system, the whole process. And one of the mistakes with the sort of gamified approach to marketing, where lead scores inflate at MQL levels and so on, is that it leads to debate about whether this thing is really one of those leads. So I'm for using it because it's readily available, and that point at which a prospective customer of your business has done all the research they want to do. They've made all the website visits they want to make. They've consumed all the content in whatever place or format that they want to consume. And they are now ready to transition from engaging with your business on a marketing level to engaging with your business on a sales level. I think that's a really important transition and a very powerful metric to measure. And therefore, MQL, marketing qualified, I've reached the end of my marketing journey with you. I'm qualified for transition to the sales process by myself, by the way, as a prospect, is a really good measurement and a really good place to use the MQL label, and it's easy to do so. So I'm generally speaking in favour of that.
Totally agree, and agree with that definition in that if you use something that avoids any subjectivity, like a declared intent form on your website, book a demo, like contact us, whatever it may be, they've explicitly said, I am interested in what you do, there can be no arguments over that. And in that instance, MQL, totally fine to use. Like, you don't need to worry about using it as a label. If somebody says, oh, MQLs are dead, like marketers using MQLs, you know, should be out of a job, whatever extreme measure we want to go to, as long as you have it defined, like in that clear way that supports an effective inbound demand generation model, no problem.
Yeah. On the point you just made as well, if in the sort of old system of scoring MQLs and passing them to sales, if you look closely, nearly every business will also discover that the MQLs that made the high intent request, the talk to sales, book a demo, which in most cases got given 100 points or whatever it takes to become an MQL, and then got lumped in with MQLs broadly. Those MQLs will be the ones that convert and close at some rate, usually a fairly attractive rate, whereas all the other MQLs that were there as a result of being scored or whatever other methods you came up with as a marketer will typically convert and close at close to 0%. They're the ones that will get rejected by sales, passed back to marketing, but you just don't need to pass them to sales in the first place. You just need to focus your effort, your marketing, and your measurement on people that actually express their intent, and you get a much better result, better conversation internally, no debate, to your earlier point, and just a healthier sales and marketing operation with better results. So that's a really good reason to get clear about MQL and move it down to the end of the marketing journey for a prospect.
Yeah, and just one last point on that, because I had that noted down as well, you know, the mix between high intent and low intent leads in this MQL, well, the old kind of MQL bucket, which is what used to happen. You have no prioritization in there between high intent leads who have literally asked to talk to your sales team and, you know, have a demo or whatnot. The speed to lead thing is affected massively in that. If somebody is high intent, declared interest in your product, you need to be following up with them instantly. Whereas deprioritize those leads that have downloaded a piece of content and viewed your website X amount of times, because let's face it, the intent is much lower and the close rate of those is much lower as well. So really you're just forcing sales to somehow manually identify that, which in most cases they won't be able to do, and just following up with all of these MQLs in the same way when they are simply not the same.
And you've brought us on to the reason that MQL has got this bad name currently, and the reason why it's criticised and scrutinised. MQL is frustrating people because it's so heavily skewed towards the low intent in many situations, and ultimately the conversion rate to pipeline and revenue is so poor at a macro level. And what's really interesting is that, you know, the macro level where you look at all MQLs as if equal and you treat them equally and you measure their conversion rate, you know, will be low. And if your marketing operation is also geared towards generating and MQLing, for the want of a better word, the low intent, you know, low conversion rate leads, then your overall picture of what an MQL is to your business becomes very, very poor. But still, and even so, if you look closely, you'll see that within those MQLs, there are the ones that express their own intent. they will be converting and closing at a rate that might surprise you in terms of how high it is. Sales will be having successful conversations with those, no matter how few they are or how many they are. They'll probably be having a good conversation with them that goes somewhere, and then they're having to make up the rest of your target and their quota with their own prospecting and so on and so forth. But marketing can, of course, shift their focus from generating low intent leads that pass a lead score threshold, become an MQL, to creating more of the MQLs that already convert and close. And it's win-win. You know, sales and marketing both generate more pipeline under that kind of situation than the historically common and now pretty derided maximize your MQLs type model.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's a race to the bottom in that model.
It sure is.
The bottom being lowest cost per acquisition of that lead. In so many instances, those high intent leads that do come may have cost more to get at some point throughout all of your marketing activity, but the return on those will be much higher versus those that you try and acquire for as cheaply as possible via terrible tactics and channels. And yeah, it's all a race to the bottom. Do you want to talk about this thing between MQL and SQL and how they may not be needed anymore?
Yeah, I've for a long time I've had a sort of problem with MQL and SQL existing at the same time in the same process and same system. Part of the problem is just to do with the tense of those terms and how I think they became sort of unfairly used to mean something that they don't really mean, and that's not very clear. I appreciate it. So let me clear that up. Marketing qualified implies past tense. This person or company was qualified by marketing. Marketing qualified lead doesn't necessarily explain what it means by qualification. That's up to you. Or what they're qualified for. What comes next. That's also up to you. But it happened in the past by marketing. And that's part of the reason why I'm comfortable with recommending people still use it today, because it can refer to what happened as a result of your marketing effort. But then you look at sales qualified leads. If you take the same explanation from marketing qualified lead to sales qualified lead, then it would mean that the lead was qualified in the past by sales for something else to happen. But what is there after sales? You know, sales has still got to do the deal, still got to have the sales conversation, create the customer. It's not like when they're qualified by sales, they instantly become a customer and they get passed off to customer success. You know, so in most businesses and in most systems, I can't see a need or a window for sales qualified lead as part of the marketing journey into pipeline. Because, you know, if you take sales qualified lead and you say it's something that marketing should qualify, well, they're already doing qualification at MQL. What else can they do on behalf of sales but that is not sales to sales qualify a lead? It really doesn't belong there.
Sales qualified lead, though, is for sales to qualify, right?
And I think it should be, but in so many cases, it's not thought of like that. It's thought of as a next step for marketing to do after marketing qualified lead. But in most cases, it doesn't work like that. And in a lot of situations, I'd just say, don't use it for that. Skip it. I think visionaries looking forward could, if they were brave enough, treat MQL and SQL as effectively equal in the life cycle journey of a prospect, which is to say a marketing qualified lead is somebody that's reached the sales process as a result of marketing's efforts, and sales qualified lead is somebody who's reached the sales process or the pipeline as a result of sales's efforts. If you want to go a step further, you could even scrap both of those and have a single qualified lead stage, which basically says, as a revenue team, we're not optimizing for where this came from. We're measuring it, of course. We can see whether it's a marketing sourced contact or a sales sourced contact, but we're working together to create qualified leads who want to talk about buying from us. And given the flexibility that exists in a lot of systems today, you're actually free, if you want to scrap SQL or scrap it and MQL and replace it with qualified lead. I think you've got to think carefully about what that will look like and how it will work for you, but it's potentially a way to go. The clarity of thinking that's taking place now externally to here, what wasn't always there.
No.
We've had to work out a lot of what we think on this subject for ourselves. And I was reminded recently of a blog post I wrote quite a long time ago about what is an MQL really, where I was advocating for moving it from, leads scored but low intent leads right down to the bottom of the funnel. And the conclusion that I drew in that post was to say that the only person that can tell us if they're marketing qualified or not is the lead themselves.
Yeah.
Because marketing qualified isn't a thing. It's a state of it's in their brain. Them being ready to buy from us is not a physical appearance.
It's a psychological thing.
It's a psychological change. So really, no matter what we think we can do as marketers in terms of scoring behaviour, measuring interaction, engagement, etc., we cannot truly know what's going on in the brain of the prospect or lead. And therefore, the only person that can tell us with any kind of accuracy if they are marketing qualified or not, as in they have reached the end of the journey with our marketing resources, is the lead themselves. And that brought me to the conclusion of saying, well, apply MQL only to people who tell you that they're ready to talk to sales. And in doing so, we created some of the things we've talked about today. Complete clarity of what MQL means, undebatable, undeniable, high conversion rate into pipeline and revenue, less frustration from sales teams who have to manage and process loads of low intent leads. And one thing that I really liked about it was we no longer were being asked as marketers to develop processes for taking back leads and re-nurturing them.
Oh, yeah, that's the worst.
Which is so hard to do and conceive a solution for it. And yet it's quite common when you have loads of poor quality leads being chucked over the sales team.
Isn't it? That's
recycling.
the word.
The recycling workflow is something that, I've never enjoyed the thought of trying to build something like that.
It just makes no sense. It captures a fundamental issue with lead generation, which is you're going into the market and trying to capture leads before they've entered the market to buy. So you're operating in the 95% of the market that aren't ready to buy, but trying to capture them and manipulate them and coerce them into being ready to buy. And they're like, sales are like, they're not ready to buy yet. Give them back to marketing. But it's like, well, then the cycle just continues over time.
Yeah, if you weren't right about them in the first place, then why would you be right about them the second time as a result of, let's face it, a email workflow, which is what 99 out of 100 marketers will think of doing when they're asked to recycle leads. Yeah. Like, they just weren't ready to buy.
The only time that would ever work is then if they came to the website or replied to an email and said, yes, I would like to talk to sales.
Indeed.
Okay, but show me the workflows and the situations where that actually happened, because let's face it, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
We've both tried it.
Exactly.
It doesn't work.
Exactly. We have both tried it and it does not work.
Yeah.
And what's really essential in marketing these days is critical thought about what's really working and what isn't. And, I've said this recently on LinkedIn, which is to say, if none of the leads that you generate become customers at anything like a respectable rate over any kind of respectable time window, and I'm talking even as long as 2 years here, you can't say that's working. You just can't say that is a strategy that works for you. And it's all tied up in this situation where MQL has become synonymous with a very, very ineffective way of providing sales with leads to work.
Yeah. Absolutely. The other point to make around measuring MQL and defining MQL the right way is all of a sudden commanding a bit more respect at leadership level and the table at the board, amongst the C-suite, where all of a sudden the metrics that you're talking about have a bit more resonance. They actually matter to the business, because ultimately, if you're coming up with this, let's face it, MQL is a marketing term that's been invented ultimately, but if you give it a definition with meaning and with purpose, that is people that have declared their interest in our product Do we all care about that? Yes, we do, don't we? We want people coming to our business and saying they want to buy from us, ultimately. If you give it that label, all of a sudden it has more meaning amongst everyone in the business.
Yeah, and the reason for the sort of additional gravity that is because it's going to have a conversion rate that actually sounds meaningful and reasonable. It's going to be in the tens of percent, not in the 0.0s of percent. And it's correlated with revenue.
Yeah.
You know, and in the environment we're in, where, you know, scrutiny is just increasing, budgets are being inspected carefully, you know, results are being really challenged and assessed. Speaking about the impact of the marketing that you're doing in the terms of real revenue generated and indicators that lead you to that is a very powerful place to be if you want to defend your budget, if you want to grow your team, if you just want to be more provably successful with the marketing that you do, then this is the thing to optimize for and focus on.
It literally helps you in every single scenario. If you're planning for next year, then, okay, well, how many more declared intent leads do we need from our website in order to generate that amount of pipeline, that amount of revenue? I've seen a bit of slander around the demand waterfall model, but I think for most businesses it can still have a place. It just gives you that visibility and that genuine metric to work towards. Ultimately,
I think the mistake to avoid is falling into the trap where you think that because you've got a model, it is the process that people will actually follow. It may be a good way to structure your work and your thinking, but it doesn't suddenly become the way that people purchase from you, and you've always got to be alive to that.
Yeah, so I suppose to wrap things up then, Phil, what we're saying here is that MQL as a label is absolutely not the problem here. The problem is the definition of MQL, the way that MQL has been defined for so long over such, a duration of time, and just the way it's been misused in the past ultimately, and what it's created as a result of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually quite in favour of using MQL to measure that point in time, that point on the journey at the end of marketing engagement and the beginning of sales engagement. And in that context, it's perfectly applicable as long as you're crystal clear on what your definition is.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, thanks very much for tuning in to that episode of Demand Decoded. We're back for another strategy session this week. This will probably go out after that, though, so you'll hear that anyway after this one probably. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.